Hey, Alec Miller here, founder of Heroes and Rogues, and today I talked to Martin Klekner. Martin's just finished his short film, Heroes of Bronze, which, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you pause this video and check it out. It is really well done, and I just wanted to ask him about the process of making a short film, why he wanted to make a short film, and what he thinks the future of some of this stuff is. I also go off on many tangents, as I tend to do, but I think it's a really good conversation that you're really going to enjoy. So without further ado, here's my interview with Martin. Hey, thank you so much for joining. It's just been really cool watching your short, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more or less just you, right? Like you've been making this as a kind of solo operation. Where have you like collaborated, or is it just like you've just been slaving away?
Yeah, basically just slaving away. It was me because it was me all alone so far, because I wanted to like basically even prove that I could do something like this on my own.
Mm-hmm.
I usually like to work this way, that I first figure out things on my own, figure out the workflows, the pipeline, then make something that shows people, yes, this can be done, and only then start hiring new people to the project. So I wanted to do it, especially with this project of mine, which is basically like a completely new project that is like a little child of mine. So I wanted really to do something on my own first. And
Right.
Currently I'm at the stage of figuring out who to hire and how to continue.
One of the things that's really hard when you're making something for yourself, just you, is like, how do you know when something's done, right? Because like you can always polish it. There's no real deadline necessarily. Did you give yourself a deadline? Did you, how did you stop working, I guess, on something and like finally hit release, or you just per scene, right? Like, because one of the hardest things for me anyways is I'll finish a scene and then I'll work on a new scene and I'll look back and I'll have learned new things. And now the quality of this scene is better than the quality of the last scene. So then you try to update that, and then this is never ending cycle. So how do you stop from being a perfectionist, I guess, in that sense?
Well, it's been very difficult, as you can tell. I've been polishing everything from start to end, so it was a never-ending story, basically. And even like one of the first shots that I started working on was from the intro of the short film, one of the close-ups on the little boy and his mother. And I've been working on those shots for like forever, the whole time of the project, I think. The very last shot that I was re-rendering the day before the release was again the little boy and his close-up. So I was very guilty of like never calling anything done, but that changed when I like announced the release date. So like a month before I felt okay. This is the stage where my improvements actually make some shots worse. So that's how I usually learn that I should release this thing. So when I started feeling like that, I actually went ahead and announced the release date, and then it was just set. So I had to finish it in that time.
Right. So you're sitting here and you're working on everything, you're polishing, you're trying to get it better. And then there comes a point where you're like going back and you're tweaking, and I call it the different but not better stage. Yep. Which is like, I can always make something different, but does it actually make it better? And for me, that's one of the signs, right, that I'm kind of done, is if I'm just changing things to change them, but not necessarily really it tells the story better, or it's creating a major difference for the viewer, then I should probably stop. And it sounds like it's somewhat the same, but also you were saying that like it actually sometimes was making it worse. Like what's an example of that in your mind, of like where you're working on something and then you're like, oh, this is actually gonna bring it down rather than up?
It was definitely faces, for example, as I mentioned, the close-ups. Sometimes I just went in and I was using some generated textures on the faces from software, character creator that I use for like the base human meshes. And sometimes I just thought, okay, this freckle is weird. I should remove it, or this wrinkle is weird. I should polish it and remove it as well. I went into Photoshop and everything looked fine, like in some basic lighting. But then when I put in the changes into the final shot, it suddenly looked worse than before, even
Mm.
with theoretically something that should have been better. Or some animations, like some battle animations. I had in mind some little changes that I wanted to make in those shots. And I went ahead, edited something, and it broke the whole shot. So I had
Yeah.
to get back to previous versions. And at that point, I figured, okay, let's not touch it anymore.
Right. Yeah. I kind of want to kind of dial it back here. So we're getting into like, you know, perfectionism and all this stuff, which is always important. But I only started following you like very recently. I think I've heard about you before from Alan Plains, who's a good friend of mine. And he was saying I should check out your work. And I think I saw some of the tutorials you've done in the past for Blender, and I thought those were really, really awesome. Um, and then I heard about this like right before release. I think it was just like Alan sent me something. It was like, hey, this thing's like going to come out pretty soon. He has a release date for it. And I was like, oh, cool. I'll check it out, you know? And then I was looking at it. I was like, wow, this is actually kind of really, really impressive. Um, and then it dropped and I was like watching it. I want more now. You know, it's like, this is really, really great.
Awesome.
So like what started you on this journey? Like why even try to do something this ambitious and then why this particular subject? We'll start with why you even wanted to make a short film in the first place.
Well, I guess I like it's two things. One is that I always loved history, but more precisely ancient Greek history, which you can see in the film. I love this topic, but I don't think there's enough of it in the popular culture. Like films stopped, there's stopped to be made big films about this topic, like 10 years ago, even more. It was with the Alexander the Great film, I think. It was a real flop. And ever since, I think producers are reluctant to get into this topic.
It's so annoying, dude. I'm just on a quick side here. I'm gonna do this a lot. It's really annoying to me that this is how like Hollywood and like the business works is like there'll be something that's amazing, that's like doing really, really well. And then one thing will flop and they're like, oh, people must hate that.
Yeah.
Like, no, they don't hate that. They hate bad movies. Like it's not that they're done with like sword and board, you know, or sandals and spears. Like they're done with like a bad film that you've made.
And
but
it's
like,
so unfortunate because like the only like successful, I guess, adaptation of some movie from that period is 300, which is fun, but
you have Troy. You have Troy as well is pretty successful.
Yes. That's true. And I enjoyed that movie. I actually enjoyed Alexander as well. Some parts of it, that some parts are horrendous. And I still cannot decide on whether I love or hate that movie.
Right.
But there's simply not enough of this topic in movies and even in like CG graphics and short films and everything.
Yeah. Well, video games especially, right? Like I can only think of one major game, and that's that like Xbox showpiece game for the CryEngine, which I can't even remember the name of.
Rise,
right, Rise Son of Rome. But
and
outside
Assassin's Creed.
Odyssey. I guess Assassin's Creed, Odyssey. But that's like those Assassin's Creed games kill me. Like it hurts my heart. Like they're such weird. They're not Assassin's Creed games. First off, like they should just be called like historical, like whatever. Like the idea of tying them into any sort of Assassin's Creed lore, or that you're like an assassin when you're like literally just like an Egyptian running around doing whatever. And there's like, and there's no like the whole point of assassinating something is like the instant kill, like planning your approach and then instantly killing something. And there's like none of that. It's like, oh, you're gonna fight someone, kick them 50 times, and go back and forth. I'm like, this is just like Dark Souls, but historical. Like, just call it historical Dark Souls, and we're good. But that's true. Yeah, that is a pretty, that one's kind of successful. And then there's like weird, like not quite like you kind of have like a lot of stuff around mythology, right? And you have like Hades, and you have certain characters like Pantheon and League of Legends and stuff, but you don't really have like I can only think of like 2 or 3 games in that whole genre.
There's a whole like a big group of people playing Rome Total War, and a lot of people who love that
When's the last time they released a Rome Total War game?
10 years ago, I
Yeah,
guess.
I'm like that's like saying like Age of Empires 2 or something, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
But a lot of people, including me, still play it. So
Right. So it's something that
there's
you
a lot of
actually
modes.
like just are really interested in. You're like, I want to see more of this. And
Exactly.
then you're like, nobody's making it. So I guess I'll have to do it.
That's pretty much how it went. And of course, then I read some books. There's the Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield. I can always recommend that one.
Oh,
It's
I love Stephen Pressfield. I have to read it. I haven't read it yet.
You got it, because that's one of his best books, definitely. And it gripped me so much. I wanted to see some hoplite action. So that was one big inspiration for me. It's about the Battle of Thermopylae, so
Mm,
probably the hottest topic from the time. And also there is this like series of books, The Long War, it's called.
hmm.
Basically like Greco-Persian wars, and it's from Christian Cameron, and that one influenced me even more, because it's like it's not just depiction of one battle, but basically the whole span of the battles with Persians. So
Mm.
that series was amazing. And after that, I was hooked, and I wanted to make something visually when it comes to that period.
Yeah. No, that's what I like to hear. When I when I hear why someone made something is like I wanted it and nobody else was doing it. So I guess I was gonna do that. And I love that so much more because I think it's easy to get caught up in complaining about what isn't there, right? Like, oh, nobody's making this, or like this movie suck now, or whatever. And there's this whole culture of critique
Yep.
that exists on the internet, and um, I'm someone that kind of comes from that school. Like, I definitely appreciate. I think the value of criticism is understanding what it is that isn't working or that you like or don't like. Like it's a way of figuring out your own taste, right? And
Yep.
then it happens to be that probably a lot of other people also share your taste. Like you're not really that unique. It's almost something bigger than that. It's more like what makes you unique also makes you like relatable to like a whole bunch of other people. It's like everyone else with that same spike is like, oh, I have that spike, right? Like so it's like, yeah, it's this unique thing you have, but then everyone else that has that same unique thing is gonna like find you, which is the irony of like when someone tries to be like just different, when it's like punk rock, right? They're like, I'm gonna be so different. I'm gonna have a mohawk and I'm gonna get tattoos, and then like suddenly there's like 30 of them that all have the same look, and it's like, oh, so you're all unique together, like. But it's kind of true. Like the point is, I'm trying to display my spikiness, my differences, so I can attract other people with the
Yeah.
same differences.
This is good that like have with this project. I make it in English, of course, and
Mhm.
I could never make it just for the audience in my country, which is Czech Republic.
Right.
Nobody cares here, so it's good that like I have it. I present it to worldwide audience,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of people like one of my inspirations, something similar, like a short film similar to what I did, is Astartes, for example, from the
Hmm.
Warhammer universe, and that, of course, has
Golly.
yeah,
Yeah.
I love it so much, and
That's a
that, of
bar
course,
that's
has
so high, dude. So such a
that's
high
a
bar.
great inspiration for me, and
Yeah.
I love the authors. Siama Patterson, I think
Hmm.
he's called, and that's a large audience. I don't think Ancient Greece has as large an audience as Warhammer,
I
but
think you'd be surprised. I think it probably does, but not in the same places.
mhm,
Like, you know what I mean? Like if you could get your film in front of like academia and like historical people and like museums, those people are huge. They're a very, very big audience. And they're probably a different demographic where they're probably older, right? They're probably
yeah,
people from like their 40s to 60s and not people from their like 20s to 30s. Um, well, with Warhammer, you get like 20s to like 60s because it's been around for so long. But like obviously ancient Greece has been around longer. And so
yeah.
um so I think it's one of those things where I've realized this recently with like my wife is there's a lot of like underserved markets. She might, I guess to make this make sense, she runs a book restoration company. So she takes old books and fixes them. And I thought it was just going to be a hobby that she would do on the side and get like one or two a month. And it turns out that it's more successful than like my company at this point. And she has like 3 employees, and we've scaled this thing in like from in 1.5 years, essentially from like nothing, like literally like rushing to build a website and to having she's booked for a year out. Like there's too many people. So now we're trying to figure out like, okay, well, how do we service these over 360 people we have in a waiting queue now. Like, what do we do about this? And so there's a niche that we found that we thought was pretty small, which is like, oh, people that really love old books. And then the answer is like, well, it's huge, and there's only like two people making stuff for them. So I think you'd
That's
be
awesome.
surprised if you can find the right people. The hard part is where those people are and where you are, right? Like, aren't the same spot. So those people aren't like running around YouTube Blender tutorials, right? They're running around historical
That's my audience is
discussion pages.
mostly so far been the software audience. So
Yeah.
I'm currently transitioning basically, or trying to figure out how to
Yeah.
transition or whether to make a new channel more focused on history. But yeah, currently I've been building it all on top of my tutorials, and currently I have more historical audience, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think if you were to I think there's a way to do both, and I think also like maybe, yeah, spinning off a second channel and doing like a once a week or once a month like talk about, here's this cool battle that I wanted to tell you about. And one of the things that's really hard for me to accept, and I think maybe this will help you too, is there's a lot of things that we think are common knowledge because we're nerdy and interested in this. So you're like, of course, if people are interested in Greco-Roman history, they've read, the Stephen Pressfield book, and they've read this, and they've looked at, and the answer is like a lot of people know. And there's a saying, right? It's just like a sucker's born every minute, which means like there's a new person that doesn't know about these scams out there are being born, so you can constantly run scams. Now, I think there's a positive view of that, which is rather than a sucker's born every minute, like a student's born every minute, right? So there's a new person that is you 5 years ago or 8 years ago when you first started getting into this, and you're like wide-eyed, like, oh, this is so cool, and you're trying to like get all of it, and you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know the books that you don't know about, and so you being the person to help bridge that gap for people is a really valuable person to be.
That's what I'm trying to do. Yeah, sharing.
It's not a bad idea. And then partnering, right, with people that are already doing it, finding some other historical podcasts and stuff, and being like, hey, I made this short, I'd love to talk about it, the historical relevancy, and whatnot, the shields and the iconography on the shields, and how accurate or inaccurate it is, and so on and so, like, so then you can get into that nerdy side you don't really get from the other nerds that are following you that are into Blender.
I actually have currently some calls with historians like that, and it's so much fun to actually have these talks, because I haven't had them throughout the production of Heroes, and finally now I can they basically take my short film and talk in their circles about it, and they find some, of course, mistakes, some intentional, some less so, and it's always so fun to listen to them and hear the feedback, because I'm very interested. I aim to continue with this project, so every bit of information that I have done wrong is valuable to me.
How long was this like journey for you? When did you and you can take it all the way back to the beginning of like when you first had this inkling of like, I should make this short film, to like now releasing?
I think like the idea that I should do something like that, it was after I read the books that I mentioned, and it's around 2018. And in the same time, I was experimenting with Blender. So I was doing my first renders in Blender and experimenting with stuff and figuring out what to do next after my previous big project. I was working on this game, Kingdom Come Deliverance. Working on the cinematics there, and we finally finished it there. So I went my own way and wanted to do something that would be just like my project. And so I made this render with like a little boy standing by an armor, and I thought, wow, this is kind of powerful. I could base some short video around this. And then I figured, okay, so what if the little boy would like remember his father, and there would be all these flashbacks of how the father lived and where he fought and everything, and how he died. And first, it's like around 2019 when I was getting better at using Blender, and I figured, okay, so I can't really make animations, so let's make scenes frozen in time, with just the little boy being like a real-time animation, but then I would have all these historical scenes but just frozen in time and camera floating through it, the easier solution,
right?
but that was the initial idea for the short film, and I wrote the script around it. But then 2020, I think, or so, I got my hands on Rococo mocap suit,
Mm-hmm.
and that one really changed the game for me. Because I was suddenly able to record everything I needed. And together with some other software tools that came out around that time or were getting better around that
Right.
time, which was Reillusion tools. It's the character creator and iClone that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And then Rococo software was getting better. I started using Substance tools for texturing and Marvelous Designer for clothing,
Yeah.
and all that together with Blender basically allowed me to animate everything and make everything move and do those large scenes. And then I put everything together in Blender and rendered it for half a year in cycles. And now it's done.
Yeah. No, dude, that's the so that's like you've given this like big overview, but like you just summed up what 5 years about worth of
for
work.
4 years. The first 2 years, the first 2 years were like in my spare time.
Yeah.
The third year was much more like I work for CG Boost. It's a company like with Zach Reinhardt. We make
Hmm.
tutorials for CG Boost, for Blender, and courses as well. So that was like half of my time in 2021, and then 2022 I worked mostly just on Heroes. So that
Right.
was 1 year of full-time work. But before that, it was in my spare time.
And then so before that was just like nights and weekends or whenever you had the chance. How consistent were you during that time? Was it like every night for at least an hour, every weekend, you didn't sleep, you didn't do whatever, or is it like, hey, I have 30 minutes today, I have this day is a holiday and I don't have any
Yeah,
place to go?
mostly the second. So I, whenever I could, but it wasn't regular at all. So when I had time, mostly on weekends, I try to work, like do at least a little bit, like every now and then.
Hmm.
But gradually, that was interesting because the topic like interests me so much. So I really enjoyed the work on it, and I started working more and more on Heroes of Bronze. So gradually, like the time I spent on it grew and grew. And then, really, like the second year, when I was building all the assets that I figured I needed
Hmm.
for the short film, which was very important actually for me, like making the storyboard and figuring out everything that needs to be built for the scenes. So I had like a list of things that I needed to build, and I was already working a lot on making assets. And the third year, it was probably like every day I built something,
Hmm.
at least a little bit. And then I stopped working on assets in 2021, I think, and started working on the actual scenes and putting everything together last year.
Mm.
So and that was definitely the most time consuming part of it.
I have a few theories I want to get into. It first, I want you to plug your course that you made for CG Boost. So
Thank you.
you made it's a environment design course, right? Like environment generation. Did that come out of the short film? Like, were you needing to build all these things for the short, and then that kind of led to you being like, oh, I can productize this, or was it something that you kind of came up with independently? Were those two things kind of tied together? I guess is my question.
It was very connected. Like
Hmm.
there were several things together influencing this decision, but basically we met with Zach, the founder of CG Boost, and we are figuring out what's the topic for my next course.
Hmm.
I already made a Substance Painter course before that
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
CG Boost, so that was very much tied to Heroes of Bronze, where I was learning how to do Substance Painter. Then I kind of not really mastered it, but
Yeah. You got
was
good enough
better
to
at it.
teach what you've learned. Right. Yeah.
And I wanted to like teach it while I had it fresh in my mind, and
Right.
I wanted to do something similar. And then Zach actually made a survey among his followers, and the topic of environments came up like the second spot, I think.
Hmm.
And I really wanted that because I knew that I would be needing a lot of environments for Heroes of Bronze, so it was really tied together. And even some of the environments, like the desert environments, I even showed in some of my Heroes of Bronze videos.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot of overlap there.
Yeah. That's really cool. Because I have this theory, which is I think there's a possibility that short filmmaking can become the most sustainable version of filmmaking. For the longest time, it was so expensive to make
Hmm.
a short film that to make a movie, it wasn't worth it to make it 15 minutes or 5 minutes or 3 minutes, right? It was only worth it if you had a 2 hour movie that people were going to go and spend millions and millions of dollars to watch because it needed to make millions and millions of dollars back. And so the idea
Yep.
of getting a whole crew together, getting all the people together, like that's the expensive part is getting all the talent in one spot to make something. And once they're making something, it's like, well, just keep this going for like 3 or 4 extra days is not that big of a deal. Because you've already done the heavy lifting of getting the machine built.
Mm.
And it doesn't make sense to build this giant machine for just like a little short thing. And then for when it came to shorts, especially live action shorts, for the longest time, there's no monetization structure. Like people typically don't want to part with money for shorts, places that it's really, really weird to me, given the success of shorts that like the number of views they can get that Netflix and Hulu especially is like not interested at all in shorts. Netflix only if they're in an anthology of some sort. So only if you end up getting enough of them together, which doesn't make any sense to me. I would totally love to be able to, if you're listening Netflix, I want to be able to turn on my Netflix and watch something for 15 minutes. That's awesome. And then turn it off. Like, or binge the next thing. Sure. I know that's your goal as a big old corporate. It's get me binge as many things as possible. But like, I guess that's the fear, but like, I don't think people are against short or
Yeah.
mid-length entertainment. Like YouTube is the king of this right now. And so anyway, so what we've been able to do now is I think with digital short filmmaking is sort of flip that whole paradigm on its head. It's really cheap, relatively, right? You've still invested thousands of dollars into making this, and the Rococo suit isn't necessarily free, but it's more so affordable to get something up and running now. And really the cost is inverse. Like the shorter it is, the cheaper it is because that's render times are what you're dealing with, and you're dealing with like, your life essentially you're pouring into this thing.
Mm.
The longer, the more ambitious your piece is, the longer it is, almost the more costly it is. So it's sort of the inverse of the filmmaking where your best value is on long form versus really poor value on short form. Now with digital filmmaking, the value is on short form. And then the cool part is the monetization, I think, is you can sort of take this thing you've made, turn it inside out, and sell all the pieces parts. So like one thing I would do if I were you and you've made all these custom assets is I'd make some asset packs, right? For like the
Yep.
Greek, like kit bashing stuff, right? I'm sure you already kind of have this in your mind. But like if you could sell all the custom assets you've made all the mocap recordings, right? And you could sort of turn this thing inside out and like you said, like do classes. And I'm doing even more inside out right now where I'm taking the short film that we're working on and taking the entire production and documenting that as we build it, right? So it's like as we're building this thing, instead of finishing the whole, like again, filmmaking style, the way movies are made is like we're going to finish this entire thing and then we're going to release it, and then maybe we'll give you some behind the scenes like after it's out, because we don't want to spoil it and we don't want people seeing. There's a fear that if we show the behind the scenes, people are going to say like, oh, is that the final version? That looks stupid, which
Yeah.
some people do. That happened recently with Grand Theft Auto, which is like one of the stupidest things you could do is look at like a pre-alpha version of anything, a screen test essentially, and be like, oh, this movie looks bad. It's like, yeah, it'd be like looking at a bunch of flour, eggs, and cinnamon, and being like, "This is the worst pie ever." It's like, okay, dude, it's not baked yet. Um, but I'm curious about your thoughts, and maybe you're not as visionary as I am. You just wanted to make something cool, right? Which is where most of us come from. And then it's like, well, how do I make this? And then how do I afford to live while I make this? But
Mm.
do you see that sort of pattern trend happening? Stardays didn't really sell or break down anything, but for a little while there, he was making like $14,000 a month on Patreon.
Mhm.
So like there's a way to that this is profitable, right? Like not, you don't just be a starving artist. And then I think, like I said, ultimately sustainable, where you can make the project pay for itself rather than relying on like outside funding, let's say, to
Yep.
get this thing made. So what do you think?
That's definitely like my original idea for this was that it would be amazing if some sort of Patreon system could basically fund my project, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I was trying to do as well. But more successful, what proved to be was actually releasing those tutorials and those
Right.
courses, because thanks to those courses, I was like the majority of the funding actually came from CG Boost courses,
Right.
because people wanted it, seemed to want bigger courses that will teach them everything from start to end,
Mm-hmm.
instead of little pieces of knowledge and videos, or even Patreon funding. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't seem, at least in my case, that doesn't seem to be as successful as those big topical courses. So definitely. And I don't really want to go the route that, for example, Blender Studio takes, where they release everything, or basically a lot of their stuff for free to just
Right.
for people to explore it. But I definitely share some of my assets and scenes on my Patreon, and I plan on making those asset packs. As actually
Right.
you mentioned, I have already something on the CG Trader, but I plan to expand this collection a lot.
Right.
I'm actually still in the phase of like waking up after I passed out after the release of it. So
Yeah, that's
I'm
all good,
looking
dude.
at
Take a
various.
break.
I'm looking at various ways that I can continue with this and
Yeah.
make it like even profitable, maybe.
Right. Yeah, I really think there's this shift happening, where I'm watching is Hollywood is losing market share by the day. It's just like, right. And then I'm noticing more and more people are going out on their own and making things. I kind of look at like the music industry pre and post Napster, right?
Mhm.
Like the music industry was this monolith. If you weren't on the radio, you didn't exist, right? That's just how it was. And then your whole job as an artist was to do everything you can to get on the radio, right? Like to get into that one gatekeeping institution. And now most artists get their start on SoundCloud,
Mhm.
right? Like it's just like, and there's no board to say, though audiences aren't gonna like this,
Yeah.
this is too much. And you have people like Lil Nas X, right, that just does a few really clever viral marketing techniques. He just seeds Reddit with a bunch of questions. Has anyone heard this song? It goes like this. And then everyone starts looking for that song, and then he releases it, and now there's a built-in audience, right? Which is it's a really ingenious way to market. But that's just some dude, right? That's doing it himself, and it's not this machine that you have to, beg and plead. And something about like the Blender Foundation, it's cool. And I love what they're doing, and I love that it's open source. I really should be giving my ethos and what I believe. I really should be using Blender, but I'm not. What's interesting about it is they're reliant mostly on like donations, right, and then investment.
Mm.
And so um, that's still to me the old model, right? That's not really like a future looking model of, it's still like, well, there's some people out there with like a lot of money, and we're going to ask them to just dump like a couple million
Yeah.
dollars on us, versus like what you're doing is like, I'm doing this on my own, I'm independent. No, I don't really answer to anybody, but besides the audience, ultimately. What's funny to me too is what's always been valuable about short films is the R&D, the research and development. So when Disney or Pixar invest in a short film, what they're really doing is trying to develop a new pipeline or a new
Yep.
render technique. So that's like any of the recent Disney things, it's all render techniques. It's like, well, could we render this in a 2D style, which is like a paper plane one and the little puppy one are both like they're sort of playing with render techniques. And then they've done some like they do various short films for like snow simulation and stuff like that before Frozen comes out. It's like, let me
Yeah,
see,
I heard.
yeah, let me try all these like little things, and then the value they get back is the R&D, but the short itself doesn't make any money. And so my idea was always, but the R&D, that research and development, is always private, right? It's always behind like locked doors for their own use. And then some of it becomes like white papers and open source stuff, but and it trickles down. But I think that if you could open that up and sell that, which is more or less what you're doing. Like, well, I need to do research. I need to develop this landscape pipeline and how I would make that. And so you figure out and you problem solve. And then I think that's the right way to go, is then you go and monetize that to fund the thing itself. Which is such a cool, I think it's a really inspiring structure for people that are, you know, they look and it's like, okay, my chances of becoming one of the designers on like in like ILM is like next to nothing, right? My chances of becoming a Blizzard storyboard artist is like zero. It's daunting to look at this machine and not see a way in. And then half the time you look at the machine, you're like, I don't even like what you're making, right? Like I don't even want to be on any of this. No one's making the thing I want to make. And so I think it's really inspiring when you can go out and do that, and you're kind of paving. And I'm hoping to be one of the people too, but you've done it before me, which is building this like, hey, here's a model perhaps someone else could follow to try to do a similar thing.
I think we're thinking about the same lines, because I don't really want to get into the machine, as you call it, because then immediately somebody would come and try to change the story that I have in mind for something different, and input stuff that I don't necessarily want in there. I really wanted to make a like cool but more historical version of events that we've seen in other movies, but I wanted to make it like how it looked at the time as much as I could. And also like there is, for example, the message at the end of the short film with the mother telling her son basically, okay, your father died fighting for us. He was fighting a lot. He actually was always away, and he wasn't really here for you, and he always provoked somebody, always aggressive, but yeah, pretty much because he was like this, he saved us all. So will you be like him?
Yeah.
So she basically asks him these questions: will you be fighting when you need to fight? And the boy doesn't really have much of a choice in that matter.
Right.
But I think that's something that would happen at that time, because there was like people valued the fighting men, and people actually knew that they owe them their lives.
Right.
Is it fair? Is it good? Is it bad? I don't know, but that's how it was, and I really wanted to depict what I read in Herodotus and other sources of the time, something like that would basically capture the essence of the time, I guess.
Right. When it comes to storytelling, it has to be that way, in my opinion. I don't think you can make a story that makes everyone happy, right? Because like everyone wants different things, and so what you're really doing is either one of two things. And I think this is what's happening with Hollywood right now, is if you try to make everyone happy, you actually end up making nobody happy, right? So if you sit down for a meal and I go like, well, what do you want to eat? And you go like, well, I really want ice cream. And someone else goes, well, I want pizza. And someone else says, well, I want salad. And you're like, cool, I'm going to make a salad ice cream pizza. And it's like, that's going to be the worst thing you've ever tasted, right? Nobody wants that. Just made everybody unhappy. Everyone disliked that, right? The meme. What you have to do is say like, look, I'm making this, and I'm making this for people that want this. If you don't want the thing that I'm making, don't eat it, right? Like I'm going to make a pizza shop, and I'm only going to make the best pizza I can. And if you want pizza, you're going to come to my shop. But if you don't want pizza, that's fine. But then don't come here and go like, well, why don't you make cheeseburgers? It's like, I don't know, because I don't know how to make cheeseburgers. I don't know how to make pizza, right? So you're sitting here like, well, what I know about is this Greek, stuff. And what I know is about the battles and the history. And this is what I'm inspired by. And this is the only way to make anything, is to take that and go like, well, I'm going to make this. And then someone goes, well, you need to put some of this element, and you need to add in this, like, whatever. And let's say they're like, oh, you need to add in a fun, quirky character because there's an audience for kids that then this doesn't have that, and it needs to have a comedy element. And you're like, I don't know. That's not what I'm care about. Like, so if you do add that in, it's going to be so unnatural, and it's going to stick out, and it's going to feel bad. And I think that's what happens often, when you're at the behest of your investors, right? And they're worried about their investment, and they go, well, we want to hit as wide an audience as possible, so let's add in more and more things, and it becomes less unique and less interesting, and less about your vision, and more it becomes this like, ice cream pizza salad, right? that nobody wants.
That's actually what I witnessed several times when I worked in the visual effects industry. Actually, I started at the other end of the process, and I
Right.
started with compositing and worked on some big movies. And suddenly, I thought like all those changes to the movies, right, like a half a year before they were supposed to be released, and it
Hmm.
was because somebody came, somebody who wasn't even the target audience, and
Right.
said, "No, I don't really like this." And suddenly the producers they started panicking and wanted something entirely different in
Right.
their movie, and something what could have been a good movie ended up totally mediocre and bad. And
Yep.
uh, i I would rather not do this project than let something like this happen to it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I'd rather it never live than live as like a monster, right? Like
Something like that, yeah.
it's like
So
people keep adding pieces
that's
on and
my
you're
that's my worst fear for
yeah.
this project.
No, and I think that's odd. Like one of my favorite things, my four favorite words, I'm probably got the math wrong to say this before see before a movie is like written and directed by. Yeah, that's four. Like that's cool because it's like, oh, cool. It's like one unified vision. And there's been this desire since the beginning of time, I think, for artists to be able to have like their their vision, their thing, like their singular and it's almost like, and this is going to sound, people can take this the wrong way, but I don't really give a frick. Um, it's like other people are almost a hindrance, right? You're like, I wish I could just take what's in my brain, put it into the world, but I have to use all these other people, which then, means the director can't just be like an artist. They have to be a communicator, right? And they have to be good at most of their skills. It's like decision making on the fly and people skills, soft skills. And I hate it. I'm currently more of a director right now than an artist, and but I've realized it's a necessary evil because like I feel like a conductor, right? Like I'm conducting an orchestra, and I'm like, you guys are all great at music. Just get together and play. And they're like, well, none of us will unless somebody stands up at the front and says like, okay, here's what it is, right? And so then you're kind of like, well, if I'm going to be standing here at the front, I wish I could just like make it happen, right? I wish I could just have like I push, and I think there's a beauty though.
Then again, you can have like happy accidents with this when
Well,
you
right.
put
So
together a team.
there's a
And
beauty when everyone's working together and
yeah.
everyone's right. So like that's the inverse of it is like, yeah, when everyone's not like vying for this thing. Um, and when I first started this short film, I tried not being that at all. I tried just telling people like, here's a generic, not generic, here's the general direction I want to head in. But
Mhm.
just run with it. Just run with it. And then it like took forever and people kept telling me like, I don't know what to make. I don't know what to do. Like I'm like, okay. So then I had to like grab the reins and just be like, make specifically this. And what's interesting is people were happier with me when I was more specific, right? And so there's a balance between being like really specific and being controlling, right? So the
Mm.
my what I was trying to avoid is being controlling because like I was like you, like I was at these places where the artist had the right idea. Like, I mean, how many times? How many times have you seen the concept art after playing a game or watching the movie and you're like, why didn't they just make that? Like the concept art is way cooler. It's a way cooler design. Just make the concept art. And then you look at what
Yeah.
came out and it's like this dumbed down, safe version. Um, I think maybe one of the challenges with that is how do you trust yourself? Like when you're making something, how do you go like without a crowd, without all these other people, how do you go like, oh, this is good, and or this is like, I don't know, maybe I'm just delusional and this and this thing sucks. Like, how do you reaffirm yourself? How do you avoid some of that?
That's a tough question, right?
Yeah.
So, but usually I just if I'm really unsure about something, I'm lucky that mostly about like for example in this short film, I didn't really hesitate about the basic structure, or the basic message and everything. I hesitated about a lot of details in that short film, but the basic things I didn't really talk with about with anybody.
Hmm.
So so basically I'm very surprised that it came out and people received it well because I didn't discuss it with anybody. But then I always like I have a little circle of people that I trust, and when I send them when I have some hesitations, or even when I have like a video finished, I send them this video and they give me great feedback. I think on it and then decide. Sometimes I decide against their advice,
Hmm.
but that's rare cases. Usually I heed their advice, and they're filmmakers, but also people from different industries,
Hmm.
and I sometimes even enjoy just like playing my stuff to people who don't understand this topic and this field of CG graphics at all, and they give me great feedback as well sometimes.
Yeah.
So and then I like sleep on it several days, and ultimately I go with my gut. But
Yeah.
that's very difficult to describe. So I
Yeah.
can't even say how. By
No,
the way,
I
that
I love that. I love that's my favorite thing again to hear. You're saying all the things to make me happy. I love hearing that the ultimate decision maker is your gut. Like ultimately you go by like this is what I want to make, and then you let other people self-select, right, to
yeah.
participate in that.
And by the way, into this project, I actually went from a company that had 100 people, and so it was completely opposite before for me on that previous project. And it was about a lot of discussions and meetings and the stuff that, yeah, I don't really like it as well. But I kind of, in the end, we built a nice little team, and I was like a cinematic director on that project. So
Hmm.
and I had like, I don't know, 6 7 people working with me, and we met every Friday, and we played what new cutscenes we finished for the game, and it was a very enjoyable process. In the end, it was very like
Hmm.
chaotic at the beginning, but in the end I really found the magic of that collaborative process. And some people even came, like, for example, there was this shot there, I was building an army
Hmm.
on a hill with riders, and it was a game built in the CryEngine, and
Hmm.
there nothing is simple there. So
No.
when I was to build a rider, I had to first put a horse there, then put the rider on it. I had to put the helmet, shield, armor,
Hmm.
everything, and it was so many clicks just for one rider. And my friend that like came to, I invited into the team. Second day in his position, he came to me, and he was watching me for a bit. And, what you doing? So I just like, yeah, I'm building an army. Cool, huh? So,
Hmm.
and he was like, no, it's not cool. How long do you plan on doing this? Because yeah, it was very slow.
Hmm.
So I figured, yeah, I will be doing this like for a month or so.
Hmm.
And he was okay. So I'll write a script for you, and you will have it done tomorrow. So,
Right.
and he actually did it. So, and I was, ever since, I was able to generate armies with several clicks.
Right.
So that's why I mentioned those happy accidents. Like
Yeah.
sometimes somebody comes and gives you this input that you would never be able to figure out.
Right. So that's our the fact that we're not immortal artists, right? Like God, right? Is like why we need that, because like I said, if you could just take what's in your head, this whole army, right,
Yeah.
and they're running down a hill, and you could just like put it onto the screen, and it would just happen. You'd be like, oh, cool, right, and then it'd be your singular vision. But because like you can't do that, like you need other
Mm.
people, right? And that doesn't mean that like other people are bad, right? What I'm trying to say is like, um, there's this the pure art, right? If you have the like pure
Yeah, yeah, right.
creativity would be like when you're a kid and you're just like what's in your head goes onto the page. And in your head it's awesome. And then on the page it's like a little stick figure, right? But when you're a kid, you're like, that's perfect. And then as an adult, we're like, that's not my vision. Um and so like you have to like use other people and then I feel bad when I use other people because I'm like, well, this is my vision, and then I'm telling you to make it when I think you should be making your vision. Like I'm kind of a hypocrite because I'm trying to preach to everyone like you should make what you want to make, and then I'm
Yeah.
telling you like, but really what you should make is what I want to make, right? Like you should play what I want, and it depends on your personality. There's a lot of people that are engineers and they love doing it. They don't have a big picture view of something, and they're just like,
Mhm.
yeah, I just want to be told what this little how to optimize, you know, crowd mechanics, or I want to figure out this little problem, and that's where they're interested. And so um I don't think anyone is more valuable than the other, because like people that are big picture people obviously need like a lot of these people that are really specialized, right? um and so I'm not trying to say like people are, I hate working with people. I love working with people, especially people that are talented, are smart, are going to save, a lot of time. But as far as the vision goes, like I said, like that whole written directed, it'd be nice if you could get a film. It's like written directed shot
Yeah,
by,
it would
and you'd be
be
like, oh,
nice experiment,
this
right?
is this guy. This is really his taste, right? It's
Mm,
not his taste plus the cinematographer's taste, but plus whatever. Which is why, like, when you do form a team, like who you choose is so important. Like, and
yeah.
that's also why you'll notice, like, after like 3 to 5 movies, directors pretty much only work with like the same 4 people over and over again, right? Like you look at Tim Burton and it's like, okay, every single time he makes a movie, it's going to be Helena Bonham Carter, it's going to be Johnny Depp, it's going to be the same what's his face? Danny Elfman doing the soundtrack, right? Like you start to realize like, oh, and that's what makes his movies is because he's found like these people that really jive with them. And he's like, okay, this is what my stuff sounds like. They all get it. We're just always going to do it with these
Yeah.
same people. And it's the same thing with it doesn't matter who it is. It's whether it's a director or composer. Arguably Quentin Tarantino's editor has had as much impact on his style as he has, right?
Mm,
But he's used the same until she passed away a few years back. But he was using the same editor for like everything. And it was her idea to rearrange Pulp Fiction because it wasn't working. And she was like, well, what if she's like, let me take this away for like 2 days and I'll come back. It's not just a singular vision. It's a vision of this like team. But
mm.
then by working together over and over again, you all start going the same direction, right? And the way I kind of look at it is like, if you run a boat, all of my analogies are pirate based because like you're into like Greek mythology and I'm super into pirates.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I have a whole room upstairs in my house. It's all pirate. Like the whole room has
It's
pirate
awesome.
stuff all over. Yeah. But you can only have one rudder, right? Like the ship itself can't go in more than one direction at a time. It can only go on one very, very particular axis, right? It's like a straight line. Um, and so you have to have one person's vision ultimately, because otherwise the ship is split in like 20, right? That can't work. So you have to have one vision to lead this crew of people that all do separate things to work towards going one direction. So you have somebody on the sails and they're trying to get the wind, and you have someone else that's managing the steering to go in one direction, and then you have other people managing each part of this thing just to get it to go in one direction. But you have to have one direction to go in, and it's like, well, it'd be kind of nice if I could just pilot this ship without all these people, which is like, eventually what you can do, but then you can't go as far as fast or carry as much, right? So anyways, all that to say, I really like the fact that your vision and your gut is like what you're trusting, right? It's like, this is what I have to do. And it's counterintuitive because I think a lot of times we want to ask other people, like, what do you think? What's your gut? What's your thing? But that's almost like a captain of the ship turning to like somebody, like, well, where do you think we should go? And they're like, you're the captain, dude. You're supposed to be directing this
You're
thing.
supposed to be telling me.
Right. So, and that's a lot of pressure, though. It's a lot of weight to have on yourself. Do you have any advice for people that are like, want to start something, but they're like doubting themselves and they're like, well, my taste is like, who knows if it's any good? Like, how do you just start? Like, how do you just like go like step one, just do it?
I generally I would start with picking topic you really like, because I actually before Heroes, I had several projects in mind, some of them fantasy, some of them science fiction. All of it I liked, and all of it I like started experimenting with, working on, and then I suddenly realized that when working on these ancient Greek assets, I was so heavy suddenly, and it just clicked and it worked in my mind, and suddenly I knew I saw these stories in my head and I saw these shots, and that's when I knew that this is probably the topic that will like allow me to carry this through, and that's what happened actually. I really could not do it. That's what's probably and then when you have something that you really love, that you're like need to get out of yourself, you usually know better how it should look, because I think your feelings will transfer into more of a clarity of mind. Also, like practicing this, trying to like when in doubt, really try to think about some topic for a long time and then decide on your own and see the consequences. practicing telling people this is how it's going to be, and I will be carrying the consequences of that. That's also one thing. Like you need to learn how to make these decisions. It's like a muscle, and if you don't practice it, it will slowly get weaker. So really taking the plunge and deciding something, and then deciding other thing, and doing it over and over will build, probably, that's my theory, can build this skill.
Mm-hmm. No,
and sometimes it can end bad. So
well, yeah. Sometimes like you commit to a concept, right? And it's like, I feel that way a lot with like Sam Raimi and a couple other directors. They have really crazy ideas, and sometimes when they commit to them, you get like, you know, a Spider-Man 2, and other times you get like some weird, like crazy, like acid trip, and it's like, all right, that one didn't work as well, you know. That's all you can do, right? Like, you got to take these big bets on yourself, and be like, this is what I feel called to do, and I'm gonna put my all into it, and we'll see if I'm right or wrong. You know, it's not scientific, but it's very scientific in a sense, right? Where you're sitting here going like, I have a hypothesis about how this thing works, and I'm going to look into it and see if it's right or wrong, you know. But the inverse is like, the annoying part about art, right, and about creativity is it doesn't work if you try to test it on scale, right? Like that's what's really annoying, is you're like, I'm going to take this big risk, but you can't take your art and then go like, okay, I'm going to test it on this crowd. I'm going to test, which is what like all the films try to do, right? They all do like our audience, right, test, and they do screening, and then but the problem with that is then it becomes like everyone's vision, and so that doesn't work. So you can't rely on the normal tools you would in a scientific method, right? Which is like control group and test, and be like, well, I'm going to show this group one version, I'm going to show this other group this other version. Because the answer is like, everyone's so different. So something that would work for one group and is actually amazing for them won't work for this other group, right? And so you have to find the people with the same weirdnesses that you have, which is the beauty and like the danger of the internet. It's like all the same weird thing. People interested in the same weird stuff can find other people that are interested in that same weird stuff. Yeah. And usually it's beautiful, and occasionally you're like, dude, you guys are all into weird stuff over there, and somehow you realize there's like 80 of you, and you all found each other.
That's why I recommend to having like that little group of people that not necessarily like same people as you are, but people you trust to give you their opinion.
Yeah, they can kind of work like guide rails, right? Like you're going to bump up against them because they're not exactly like you. Because if they're exactly like you, you'd all be like, boop, this is great, this is great, this is great. But so they're close, and so it's like if you're drifting and you're like, well, am I on the right course? And then you can kind of ask somebody, is this giving you this impression? And they're like, no, I'm getting this from it. And you're like, okay, well, I need to correct then.
That's very valuable. Yeah. By the way, if you when you mentioned the short film you were working on, it's that space short film, or is it something else? Or
yeah. So we've been building this it's like 2 years or almost maybe 3 now. I think we're starting our 3rd year right now, and on the making of it. And it sort of started as a strictly like a Dead Space. If Dead Space had an HBO TV show, what would like the title animation be? Right, which was like probably the correct scope for this thing, but like you, like I was like, yeah, it'll just be stills, and we'll just like move the camera around it, right? Like and then well, we started asking questions, and it was like, well, what would the story be, so we can inform the visuals? And then we came up with actually a really decent story. Alan Plains is my co-author, and the story is actually kind of interesting, and I was like, that's cool. What if it was like on a jungle planet, right? And then so it's on a jungle, and then we're like, well, what would the characters be? What would they want, right? And then we're like, well, what would be some of the antagonists? What would be some of the monsters? And it's like, well, we've never really seen this stuff infect animals before. It's always just been humanoid stuff or just complete monster, but it's never been like, oh, that's a recognizable as a whatever. So eventually I was like, it clicked with me in one meeting. Alan and I were talking about it. We have our protagonist, Anne, who's a security guard at the science center, and the last scene we had her was her battling this like necromorph gorilla, essentially, right? And I was like, this is cool, but there's no story here. And then I was like, it just like came to me. I got it. I was like, oh, okay, I got it. The gorilla was part of the research team, right? It's like a Winston from Overwatch. And so then all of a sudden there's a story. All of a sudden it went from like, okay, here's this random character fighting this random monster because we need an escalation in this event to being, oh, this is actually one of their research buddies, right? It's like I forget that it's Coco. Yeah, Coco, like the sign language gorilla. And Coco was part of the research team. And that's actually what happens is they're studying this infective, thing, all these animals that are getting infected, and then she ends up catching it, right? She gets something breaks out and then killed, or it's Marmaduke is the name of our monkey. So Marmaduke ends up getting the thing, and then so now we have a whole story. So now we open with like imagery of kids' drawings of like the research team, and part of it's the monkey, right? And so now she's not just facing an evil bad guy; she's facing who used to be one of her friends, who's now this terrifying monster, right? And so now it's kind of broken out away from being simply a Dead Space remake to being more inspired by like everything that has some sort of viral contagion. That breaks out in the research lab, but then the story that actually makes us connect and be a more interesting than just good guy fight bad monster is like it's this through line of like, oh, the science team losing control and all this, which is a very classic, like been done before story. But I don't think I've ever seen someone had to like put down their pet, right? A slash friend. It's worse than a pet because again, it's like Winston. It's like your pet, but also you're like a member of your team. So now it's more of like all those things combined into one. And so I'm not really calling it. I'm trying not to get sued.
Yeah, right. But I wanted to ask that how you gonna figure out this.
But I don't think it will be a problem because it's so different. Like everything, we made everything from scratch. There's no like we even have a soundtrack being done by a guy right now. So it's all completely our own work. Like Anne isn't a character that exists in any of these properties. So there's definitely gonna be things that you clearly recognize, right? You're gonna be like, oh, that's sort of a Dead Space inspired outfit, right? And but you can look at Dead Space and be like, well, this is clearly Alien, right? Like this is like, oh, he's an engineer and the ship's going wrong and there's things running around through the vents and like killing people. So like it's everything you ever make, right? Like is going to be taking from the things that you love and have consumed and then putting it back out. So that's more of what I'm going for now with it, is moving away from just instead of stealing from one thing, I'm stealing from like 5 things.
Good. But yeah, I love those topics. So definitely fingers crossed. I'll be awaiting the more results of that. By the way, you mentioned composer, and at the beginning I said I was all alone on this, but of course I had a composer, Richard Albert, who helped me on my project. And having a composer for a short film actually can be great when it comes to inspiration, I'd say, because we were like I gave him the first edit, he gave me some first music, then I adjusted the edit based on the music, and he adjusted the music based on my feedback. Plus, I added the voiceover. I hired an actress, Abigail Rice. She's based here in Prague, where I live. She's great. I love her voice, and she basically recorded in few afternoons. She recorded the voiceover for me, but I was like always shifting it in time and editing it, adding stuff, even doing some re-recordings. So that was a process as well. So these 3 people actually helped me a lot when reaching the final edit.
I want to reiterate this because I don't think I communicated it very well. No man is an island, right? Meaning, even in my utopian vision of like, you just take what's in your brain, you make it. Somebody's had to make all the software and someone's had to make all the stuff, right? So like, we're always collaborating, right? Like everything is a collaboration. And so, like you need a team, you need people, right? You can't just take the thing and put it into your head. And so I do think artists also need to get away from this idea, even though it's becoming more and more possible, of like AI stuff, I'm gonna do everything, right? Like that's the wrong mentality to have. I'm not saying that's the goal as an artist, is to try to be doing everything, because I think there's just people that are better than you at different things, and being able to leverage their skills, awesome. And a lot of times it helps you out. but like as far as pure artistry goes, the purest art would be straight from my brain into the canvas, right? And it becomes less pure, quote unquote, the more people work on it. But that's a good thing, I think, and necessary. And that's really cool. Yeah, it's always nice because like, and usually what it is, and it sounds like in this case, like you run up to something that's just literally impossible for you to do. So you're like, well, I can't be a female voice actress, right? Like that's not something I can do. So that's going to be a collaboration. And it's like, and I'm not a musician, so I guess I'm going to have to hire an artist, like a musician. Like there's things that you just cannot do. It's just really weird with AI because I've looked at it and there is like voice changers now, right? That does like an AI voice, or you can like type in what you want it to say and it will just like spit it out in a more or less believable way. And I'm like, oh, see, so I don't even need voice actors anymore. And I do think that will happen. Like there's gonna be a film in the next, I'm gonna call it right now, in the next 10 years, that's like one person using a mocap suit, using voice changers, using Unreal or whatever, and being every character like and it's gonna be one of these crazy films that used to only be possible by like shooting it 100 times and you walking around the room like doing whatever to be all the different characters and putting on a wig and
Yeah.
like those one
That's
man plays.
definitely what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm afraid of it or excited about it.
If they're a genius, it'll be amazing, and if they're like and if they're a quack, it's going to be awful, right? That's just how
Yeah.
everything is. Like whenever you amplify individuals' ability to do things, it's like, wow, like this one guy was able to like Einstein or whatever, right? And then you have like, oh, this one guy was able to like you get the both.
Yeah.
Nothing, yeah, there's no solutions. There's only trade-offs. So.
But when it comes to that vision, like of like taking it from your head, directly putting it on screen, that's actually something that really never happened before. And thanks to AI, this might be possible for the first time. So we'll see. Exciting times ahead, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, there's going to be people that have really sick stuff, right? There are people who like because all you are, right, is just a combination of your mom. Not just is the wrong way to say this, but you are a combination of your mom and your dad, right? Like their DNA put together makes you, and you have different things. And then your ideas, like you can't come up with an idea from nothing. You can't think of a new color. You can only make a new color by taking base colors that already exist and like, I'm going to take this color and this color, and like, oh, look, that's a new color, right? And so what you are is going to be all of your experiences and the things you've consumed, right? Whether that be information and whatever, and then filtered through your body and out. And so some people are gonna have weird stuff. They're gonna have weird stuff that they've consumed. They've had weird stuff and it's gonna come out weird. You're gonna be like looking at this thing like, I don't know if I like this. And then there's gonna be other people that, have been consuming really interesting things. Like it's one of my favorite things is Warhammer 40K for that reason, right? It's like somebody who's really, really into like religious symbolism and like dark age history and mythology and like sci-fi dark future space, and they somehow married those two things perfectly, and you're like, what? And Star Wars is the same way. It's like Lucas is like, I'm really into like Japanese fairy tale storytelling, knights and wizards, right? That's what they're called originally. And then also like World War II dogfights, but also like cowboys, which is like Han Solo, right? And but then also like pirates and like, but also this, and somehow he's able to like push all of it together. And it wasn't just him, right? Like his stuff is kind of a mess, but then with the help of other people, his guardrails, like we were talking about, kind of put this together into something that somehow works. It'd be like if you could make that like pizza, ice cream, salad work, right? It's like none of these really fit together. Cowboys with a giant like furry companion but then they're knights, and the knights are actually fighting. They're Jedi knights, which are kind of like wizard knights. Yeah, it's very like it's very much like kids' way of imagining things. Where you're like, oh, what is it? You're like, I'm a shark wizard, and you're like, what's a shark wizard? And they're like, it's what I am. And you're like, okay, what are you fighting? And they're like, I'm fighting a robot lizard. And you're like, okay, so you're a shark wizard fighting a robot lizard. Like this doesn't work. But then like sometimes people make it work.
Sometimes it works. That's why directors are still needed. And like people say that with the emergence of AI, actually good taste is going to be like you will have all these options generated for you, and then deciding what's the best option will be the most valuable skill in the future, they say. So
Hmm.
yeah, maybe everybody's going to be a director at some point.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the most interesting takes on AI is Ashthorpe's, and I've I didn't realize it until he said it. And I was like, holy crap, he's right. He's like, what AI does is it will take like whatever it's a mirror. And I was like, huh, because it's like whatever you're thinking about. So especially image generation, you have to prompt it, right? It doesn't just make something on its own. So you have to say like, make this plus this plus this. And then whatever you've been thinking about is the first thing that pops to your mind. And so you're going to tell it to make something. And it's really a good look at like, oh, what have I been consuming lately? Like, what do I like? And then the introspective nature of it's really interesting because
Mm.
when I got AI, the first thing I started making was Warhammer 40K stuff. I was like, Sister of Battle with flamethrower and like angel wings. And I was like, you know, Space Marine with, you know, this, that. And I was like, oh, okay, that's what I've been consuming a lot of. I've been watching a lot of content around that. So it's like interesting. So that's what's been running through my head. And then what's crazy is looking at other people's stuff. So non-artists, like what they make it's really weird. It's a lot of it's very like Beeple, like if you're familiar with the artist Beeple.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like a
sure.
lot of these people are just making like Joe Biden yelling at missile, like you know what I mean? And you're like, huh. Or it'd be like, you know, whatever their favorite actor plus like whatever it is. And a lot of it and this is ArtStation, by the way. If you look at ArtStation, it's like, oh, okay, so like everyone is just watching, like, is just looking at tits, right? Like everyone is just looking at women because that's you put out what you consume, right? So like all these people are just consuming beautiful women, right? And that's like the vast majority of what people make,
Yeah.
and it's the vast majority of what people have been looking at. Um,
And big weapons then, second.
yeah, and then guns, right? And so it's the same thing with like with AI. Like a lot of it's just like hot girl, hot woman. Like it's a lot of the prompts, and I do a lot of rating. I'll rate the like to try to program the AI. I'll rate the images,
Mhm.
and you're trying to tell it what are good or bad, and like a good 30% of them are just like some form of female. And all,
Mhm.
but that tells you something about us, right? Like if you see that pattern, it shouldn't just be like, oh, we're all horrible. It's like we view female beauty as like almost the ultimate thing, right? Like it's like one of the pinnacle things that we strive towards, right? And it's interesting
Mhm.
because even in your short, you know, the sort of end character, the main thing is this female asking a question towards the boy, right? And she's sort of the, you know, you could say like the mother goddess, right? If you wanted to get into like Stephen Pressfield type, you know, ways of describing things, and she's asking, it's nature, right? Asking you, are you going to live this way or not? Like, are
Yep.
you going to follow in these footsteps or no? Um, so yeah, our creation is a mirror to ourselves. So it's an interesting thing. I guess to ask kind of a couple questions on that. I don't know how much time you have, but um, you know, how conscious are you of this stuff when you're in the act of making it? Like, you know, that this is you know the layering and the symbology, right? That you're looking at the kid's looking at his dad's armor, which is a representation of his strength, right? Not he's not looking at his dad's like farm or his dad's like you know paintings, right? Like that would
Mm.
be a symbol of his creativity. He's looking at the masculine and warlike side of his dad. Is this something that you're very conscious of, or is it first you put it out there and then you sort of like, oh, interesting, as you're looking back at it?
I definitely thought about like this was one of the first topics that I thought about, especially because this basically all started with that one artwork where the symbolism was very clear with the little boy trying to go into the footsteps of his father, and then I figured, okay, so what's missing? I have a boy, I have his father, I have all this
Mm-hmm.
masculine symbols there, and what point of view is missing. And that basically gave me the idea that it would be interesting to make it from a different point of view and narrated by the mother and
Mm-hmm.
give her point of view as well. There's like this whole backstory behind Penelope, the mother
Mm-hmm.
character in the short film, and she is basically not very happy with her husband, with Nikephoros,
Mm-hmm.
the father character, because she loves him, but he was always away, and he basically left her to live her life alone and bring up the little boy alone
Right.
and take care of the estate alone and everything like that. She knew how he was. She couldn't really like. Yeah, that's who Nicephorus was, and she had to accept it. She learned to accept it, but she was never too happy about it. And the biggest irony for that is in the end that she has to ask her son to become basically a similar thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I really try to put in these like backstories and little symbolisms in there.
Right.
It can be viewed as just a simple fun video, but especially since I plan on making like a bigger story with all these backstories expanded, I wanted to have a lot of story points like this in there already.
Yeah.
So definitely, yeah, it was there. I wanted it to be there from the start.
No, that's really cool. I like hearing that a lot. Uh, because there's this interesting thing that happens with art, right? Where you're never really sure. There's a few things that happen. One of them is you're never sure if you have the ideas or if the ideas have you, right? Like that's
Yeah.
one part of it, where it's like, am I coming up with this, or is this something that wants to happen and I'm enabling it, right? Like, that's a weird thing that artists do is kind of channeling the like I felt this way about like this whole originally about this whole short film monetization thing. I'm like, oh, I have this great idea. It's my idea. And then like I look around, there's like 30 other people doing it. And I'm like, well, this is my idea, right? And then it's like, okay, no, this is an idea that wants to happen. It's the time for this shift to change where film production becomes more, especially digital film production, becomes more akin to SoundCloud, right, in the post Napster era than it does the records and radio. And I'm just channeling that, and I'm one of the many people. And if I do it, then it's great. And if I don't do it, there's other people that are going to do it. So that's one aspect of it. But then the other aspect of it is like, how intentional am I with my symbology, right? Like, because there's this temptation, like this always happened in film school, and you tell me if you've experienced this in your like artistic endeavors, but somebody will make something and you'll be like, oh, it's really interesting that you chose red for their shirt because that was like really, they're an angry character and that really shows their anger. And they're like, well, yeah, that was just what they showed up with that day. Like I didn't.
I did that, right?
Yeah, right. And then you have this question where you're like, well, was I subconsciously doing it? Like, but I think most of it's like BS. Like most of the time, like,
Yeah,
no, you didn't think about that. But is that something you've recognized that like happening in artistry?
definitely. Yeah. When I even when I studied some art history, like modern history, and we came to all this like modern philosophy about this, like that actually somebody actually I can't remember the philosopher's name or the artist's name, but there is this whole movement of that the audience is actually more important than the author,
Right.
and that how the audience sees it is what gives the art the meaning. I'm not really on board with that.
Yeah.
But sometimes I know exactly what you mean when you say like when you said that I don't know I call it almost pathetically divine inspiration.
Yeah.
But
No, that's not pathetic
it
at all.
feels that way somehow because it just like there are these ideas that spring into your mind precisely when they need to, and then they influence everything in your project,
Right.
and you don't even remember how you come up with that stuff.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like it's not even from you. So yeah, that's I know definitely what you talk about.
I have a theory. I'm going to put this out there, and people are probably going to find it insane, but I have a theory, a scientific theory about what that is. So we have this obsession with like, you know, our ancestors and like this idea of their spirit living on. This is like something that's been around forever, right? Like they're watching over you or they're guiding you, right? And then in every tradition, right, if you've studied like the Hero with a Thousand Faces or any of this stuff or Jung, you'll know like everyone sort of has this thing of like there's the ancestors, there's your fathers, there's your father's fathers, there's your mother, and there are all these influences like on you trying to help you out or control or protect depending on what you know the thing is that's happening. And I think scientifically what that is something like Assassin's Creed, right? Where animals have a DNA memory that's really, really strong. And it's something that's coded into their DNA because it's every time a salmon swam this way, they just know when they're born, okay, after I do this, I have to swim uphill. It's very counterintuitive. You're going to swim up a waterfall towards this thing in order to have your kids there, and everyone's going to do it, and inevitably, through this DNA memory. And we seem to not really have that. It doesn't seem like we're just born and we're just like, oh, we have to like teach us this. And I think what becoming an artist and the act of like meditation and listening, and people will say like, oh, it's listening to the universe, or it's listening. I think what you're listening to is the DNA of all of your ancestors through all of time. And when you have this like divine inspiration or whatever it is, what you're able to do is somewhat like Everything Everywhere All at Once, where she's like, oh, all the me's that I've ever learned, but she has it on like a parallel plane, right? It's like we're all coexisting on these. I think it's a Z-axis plane, right? You're tapping into all the memories or actions of the past people that you have in your DNA that have done these things, and some of their memories and some of those actions are hardwired on a cellular level into them. And that's what you're tapping into whenever you have this moment of like inspiration, or someone does something that's like superhuman. It's because the fact that they have this latent knowledge, right, in them of all the things. And I think that there's some sort of science somewhere that back me up. It's science fiction, but I think it's my theory on it. I don't have any hard evidence necessarily, but that's what I think is happening.
That's a nice take on that. I like that.
Yeah. And it works with everybody. That's the cool part too. It works with, if you're like atheistic and just like completely a materialist, it's like, well, it's your material, it's your DNA. And if you're like more religious, it's like, yeah, that's all of my ancestors, like that they're in me. The spirit of my father is working through me, right? It's like, the cool thing is from the beginning of time, because we all share one common ancestor, let's say, right? Whether you believe that's Adam and Eve or the first evolved people. So we all have like one ancestor, right? That since then there's this through line of all the great actions they've ever done. And that's also why I think it's so great to do a great action. What you're doing is you're encoding into your DNA this thing that you work so hard to accomplish, whether that be a physical feat or a creative feat. And then you're giving that to your prodigy down the line, is here's some stuff that you can use, hopefully, at the moment calls for it and you're open to it. So that's like my early thousands Matrix movie type theory. We had all these movies come out at that time that were all like these crazy big ideas, and then like two of them worked and the rest of them were all like way too out there.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. It's definitely something that and not everybody, I feel like not everybody has this like knowledge of what they really want to do and what their dream is. And like once you have it, it's something that I really appreciate, that I know what I want to do, what sort of project I want to create, and that I have this certainty that this idea is the right one for me, that I know that it's not it cannot be taken for granted. And I'm really happy that I have ideas like this, and that I can in the end maybe bring them into reality.
Yeah, no, that's really, really cool. That's probably a perfect place to probably stop. I think we've been doing this for like an hour or an hour and a half.
Awesome.
But dude, I love it, and I think I talked more than I wanted to, but you were bringing up a lot of ideas that I've had for a while, and I've been able to speak them. And I hope that, when we put this out, people are going to be able to see a lot of this and really get inspired by what you're doing. And I think it's super cool. So thank you so much for coming on, man.
I love this. Thank you. And it was great chat. Great ideas.
Yeah, we'll do it again. We'll do it. I want to hear more about your thoughts on Steven Pressfield and on, kind of the concept behind being an artist, and as well, because like the tools are really cool and I love them, and we need them, right? Just like we need people, but what makes the thing is like your philosophies and beliefs, and
I'd be happy to. So I'm glad for that.
All right, thank you so much, man.